us now. We have ensconced in deep dark Wellington there, Rodney Hyde. Good morning to you.
Oh, lovely to be here, Wallace.
Great to now. Have you got a scarf on and a hat? Are you nice and warm?
Nah, it's not even cold.
Oh. You're hard man. That's what it is.
No, I tell you what I'm doing. I'm reading the book about Shackleton's trip Endurance, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. And you realise that we're just pussies.
Yeah. Well, someone who's by no means, he's certainly not a pussy. His name is Selwyn Manning. Hello, Selwyn.
Yeah, hi Wallace. How are you?
How are you? And you're nice and warm there?
Yeah,
nice
not too bad up here in the sunny Auckland. But I get that message, Rodney. You know that comparatively we're very, very warm and cosy compared to what Shackleton endured.
Well, I'm sitting in bed reading this book, with 3 hotties wrapped around me and a scarf and a hat, and feeling cold just reading the book.
That's a picture in itself.
Yeah. Oh well, whatever moves you, Selwyn.
Do you think though, just out of that, because I read, Rodney, I've read recently a fantastic book called The Trial of the Cannibal Dog about Captain Cook and these brave men of yesteryear who had this incredible taste for adventure. Do you think that they were the real men and we've lost that, I guess?
I have to say, I'm reading this book and you can't help but sort of jump ahead and look on Wikipedia to what happened to some of them. And Frank Worsley, he was Shackleton's captain. He was a Kiwi born in Akaroa. And he went on the ship, just briefly. They spent a year camped out on the ice. They sort of did these perilous journeys across the sea. God knows how they survived, but they did. He finished up. Then he signed up immediately to World War I, saw action. And at 69... said he was 64 and signed up for World War II.
Amazing name. Just amazing.
Amazing.
I haven't flagged this with you guys, but I want to have a brief word about a paper. It's an historic paper. It's been with us for 126 years, and it has gone now under the editorship of Cameron Slater. They had about 5 editors in the last 6 years. Selwyn, Truth newspaper. Were you ever a fan, or did you read it?
No, I didn't, but I remember back to, those dark days in the 1970s and early 80s, I think it was, when the 8 o'clock was around. And I think, that used to be on the back of the illegal tote tickets, that black market and gambling that used to be around. And so journalists, I think we all, well, I wasn't a journalist then, but I think everyone thought that, the 8 o'clock was being sold and Truth were being sold on their the strength of their articles. But in many ways it was that urban black market of gambling that was holding them up. And I guess what I'm saying here is that times have changed.
Times have changed.
The Truth, and 8 o'clock obviously went years ago. The Truth has been one of those that have hung on, and it's an unsustainable business model in my view.
Yeah. Rodney, what do you think? Was it part of your Sunday morning mix?
No, never. And I just read a great piece by Jock Anderson, who worked there in, I think, the 70s. And I do recall the stories that the Truth broke, but I don't remember ever reading the Truth. And when it got the new editor, I bought a copy, and I'm no prude, but I was so disgusted I quickly threw it away.
Why?
Oh, the ads! My God, I was scared that you wouldn't want to read it in public.
Someone taking a photo of you, Rodney, as you're buying it over the counter or something. It's worse than buying one of the other magazines, isn't it?
I wasn't so bothered about these days about public opinion. I was more worried about close friends and associates.
Yeah. One of the things with what we saw with Cam Slater leading that there though is that he did build up some credible people around. Like there was, like in the sub-editor area. Just really good production people, and so in some ways, you take the editorial kind of content and the ads out of the way, the production was improving, and in some ways it's a bit of a shame. I think when it gets down to, if people are really analysing what went wrong for the Truth in the short term, you look at the juxtapositioning of where money went, and they may get some answers. There's a lot of rumour circulating, particularly out of the Auckland area at the moment, that money was pulled out of the Truth in big numbers, and that it was left by the previous people with massive tax liabilities. And so it's not necessarily the responsibility of the editor in this case.
All right, very interesting. 15 minutes past 8. Did you read Truth? Text us. Text live to 3939. 3920 is the text number. Now, the veteran MP Leanne Dalziel has confirmed she's running for the mayor of Christchurch. Rodney, if you were a Cantabrian, would you vote for Leanne Dalziel?
No.
Straight up. Why not? Why not?
Look, I like Leanne, but I'm surprised there hasn't been more commentary about this. I actually get annoyed, and it goes both ways, Labour National, with people who sign up to be the MP for 3 years in an electorate, and then, let's face it, Leanne's going for the mayoralty because she's been pushed out of the limelight by David Shearer. Fair enough, that happens. But she should sit quietly and see her term out looking after her electorate. But no, she's seen a better opportunity, as I see it, being the mayor, and so she's going to put the country through the expense of a by-election, and I don't like it.
She would disagree with that. She would say, look, I've lived this Christchurch thing. I have been through here, houses destroyed around me. And what I've heard is that she has worked very hard on the ground, Rodney.
Oh, no doubt. Look, she's a great MP. She works hard. I've got nothing against her personally, but it seems to me that if she could... Look, and the other thing, to be frank, she could do more in Parliament than she could do as the Mayor of Christchurch. Why? Because the way the legislation's set up, the Mayor is left basically powerless.
Well, that's the point too, isn't it, Selwyn? What do you think of that?
Yes, Rodney was a former Minister of Local Government, certainly knows what he's on about there. But I think Rodney's hit a few things. Leanne Dalziel knows that the weather vane of power inside the Labour Party caucus has moved away from where she is. You saw Charles Chevelle move off for similar reasons some months ago. You see her now putting her hand up and saying, yeah, I'll run for Christchurch. I think her credentials speak for themselves in Christchurch, and it's up, it's not for an Aucklander like myself to say, whether or not the Christchurch people should vote for Leanne Dalziel or not. But I think, her credentials do speak for herself on the local scene. Politically, to me, there's a vacuum that needs to be filled in the candidacies down there. If you look at it from the outside and you're looking at Christchurch, clearly Bob Parker has been a very effective mayor in many ways, and I noticed in recent weeks he's been able to steer the government down on different things, which I think speaks to the spirit of Christchurch and Canterbury as a region. Leanne Dalziel perhaps is more a details person and being able to find a way through and process, so it'll be an interesting campaign. The questions are, I think, related to Leanne and Dalziel is what is she going to do categorically if she actually begins to campaign there, and secondly if she wins.
What about you, Rodney? Were you ever a Bob Parker man, or have you looked at his his performance there? That's something that Cantabrians can be proud of.
I know Bob well, and I like him, and I love the fact that he was able to handle the media and assure people through that terrible time. But I think the problem is this: anyone that's seen to be in charge of Christchurch, even if they're not really in charge, are going to take a hiding, and anyone that's coming along and promising to fix it will win. What will happen is the person that's promising to fix it will win, and then nothing much will change.
That's the problem, isn't it?
So you think in your gut instinct, Rodney, that Leanne's got a pretty good run there?
Yes, indeed. And of course, the difficulty for a mayor is it's not like party politics. They don't have a team around them. They've got the councillors who are very independent. They don't have a party machine behind them. And Leanne Dalziel will bring a bit of that, at least to begin with.
I think what it does too is it does illustrate that the Labour Party, its caucus in particular, is now starting to wake up to the need that it needs to transform into new faces, new blood, even with those that have had ministerial experience. So with the likes of Leanne Dalziel going to this type of thing, it raises those questions. Should central government MPs, members of parliament, when they realise they are getting past their use-by date, move off into local government? Is that satisfactory for the voting public, or do we need local government specialists in those roles?
And also understand that, we're basically trading on our name, aren't we? She's well known because she was an MP and a minister, and that that's why she has a good chance of winning. It's actually simply just name recognition.
Well, it might be too that that Labour pack around Christchurch realised that their numbers in elections were going down, and they needed to actually get off their butts and do something. And their representation had gone up a notch. So I think any mayoral candidate needs to be able to be a household name in a sense.
But we like the idea, don't we, of sort of citizens being able to stand and being able to succeed and win, when actually what we've created in New Zealand now is a professional political class, people who are full-time throughout their entire life, MPs or councillors or mayors, and that's who they are, that's what they do, and that bothers me a little bit. I think you should be able to stand as a citizen and put up your credentials and your background and win, but we know that's impossible.
Can I ask you, Rodney Hyde, have you ever thought of running for mayoralty?
No.
Why not? Why not?
Well, really for that reason. I didn't expect to stay as long as I did in Parliament, and I loved it, and I thought it was a great privilege. But I think, you've got to make way and give other people the opportunity, particularly people who, when you start out, you're very enthusiastic, you're very positive. And I think as you've been there a while, you become, like me, old and cynical.
But it's surprising in a way, Rodney, in the sense that outsiders have watched the ACT Party, who really started to affect policy in local councils like Papakura, for example, back in the 1990s. You could see almost like the ACT Party was trying out some of those policies there. You saw it making moves into other areas. It's surprising that a former leader wouldn't actually be, seduced is not the right word, but tickled into considering that type of thing. In some ways, is that a sellout to the stakeholders that expect a significant person within that party to actually make a move on?
Well, maybe, but I think the way to look at it is I've always tried very hard to sort of get young people in and new people in, and then to sort of create a viable organisation. I think that's always hard, particularly for third parties, but I just do not like the idea of myself or anyone sort of having a lifetime of politics.
I wonder too whether or not under the current leadership that you look at the ACT Party and you realise, well, it's too factionalised, diverse in the sense that it's a spent force, it's dog tucker, and that it doesn't have any life left in it.
If you applied that reasoning... If you applied that reasoning, Selwyn, you have to say Labour's in big trouble.
Well, I'm not a member of the Labour Party, so it's up to them to say.
All right, we've got to move on now. Text live to 3920 your thoughts on this. We're with Rodney Hyde and Selwyn Manning. After the break, we talk manufacturing. Is it indeed in crisis? 26 minutes past 8 o'clock here with Selwyn Manning and Rodney Hyde talking about the issues through the week. This one about manufacturing, we're spending the hour from 10 to 11 talking about this. This is on the back of a report that came out. Now, the government calls it a political stunt, but this report says, look, the jobs are being lost, and they're being lost in quite significant numbers. 17,000 jobs last year. Is manufacturing in New Zealand a crisis? Selwyn Manning, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it definitely is, in the sense that we're seeing job losses, and that's got to be one of the litmus tests on whether or not that sector is performing or not. I think it's really tied into some of the decisions that were made at the front end of the national-led government's policy out and budgets right from the start, where they started pulling back in those areas which facilitated burgeoning new export market exporters from meeting their markets overseas. There was a lot of work that was going and plugging the right people to the right markets in years past, and I think that those decisions to unplug were foolish, and that's had an effect on manufacturing.
But what do you say to people like Stephen Joyce? He might be joining us later on, actually. He says, look, the BNZ Business NZ Performance has indicated that our manufacturing sector is now expanding at its fastest rate since 2004 in terms of the numbers. Yeah,
well, all these ways of how you define different areas, it comes down to spin. On the ground, if people are losing their jobs, that the overall, the sector, the manufacturing sector, is not meeting its potential, considering that there should be growth in these sectors, then you've got to look at the overall picture. And yeah, you can get into the semantics of this and that, and trying to counter the spin of the minister that's overlooking these areas. But at the end of the day, the people on the ground really know what's happening.
Is that the standard? Is that what we should be looking at, Rodney? It's the people on the ground, and it's the jobs being lost in those small centres across the country. Tokoroa, as an example.
There's no doubt that economies around the world are changing dramatically, but I think it's a mistake to say, let's look at manufacturing and use that as the sort of litmus test of the success of our economy. Actually, what you've got to do is look at the economy overall and how it's performing. Is it doing well? Well, no, it could be doing a lot better. But I don't think it's right to focus on a particular sector and say, let's have policies that work for that. And then you look at the particular policies and surprise, surprise, they're exactly what the Labour Party were touting before they went into this inquiry. One is to sort of reinflate the economy through loosening monetary policy. Well, we've done that, and we did that actually to help manufacturing and agriculture, and it didn't work. The second thing is to regulate the electricity price market. Electricity is actually a very small component of the cost of doing business in New Zealand, and that is going to create all its own problems. And then, of course, their third proposal was to introduce a capital gains tax. That's it.
Look, one of the reality checks in New Zealand is an export-led economy. And irrespective of all those things Rodney said, and yes, there's strength to many of them, but if you start tinkering around with the potential of those either in the agricultural sector or the manufacturing sector, and not assisting them to get to the right markets overseas when, like Rodney says, those markets are changing, then you're going to have an flow effect that's detrimental to the stability of those sectors.
So we rely on those sectors. What about the idea too, Selwyn, is that the nature of jobs are changing? I mean, you're not going to get you're not getting those blue collar jobs perhaps anymore. So an old Fisher and Paykel stove is not a stove anymore. It's a high tech piece of computerware.
I do think that we're heading into a branding or thinking shift on how we go about these things, just like in the 1984 to 1990 period, where diversification for farmers was the key word. And I think for manufacturers that's there, but it would be wrong to suggest that they are behind the eight ball in that thing. What we're seeing is knowledge type industries that are positioning for product and service in that export area. Now remember, back in the early 2000s, for example, it was only product export that the New Zealand trade areas were interested in. Now it's trade, product and service. So the diversification is taking place.
Rodney, if you had the choice of buying a nice wool suit from New Zealand and a nice wool suit from China, you'd want the New Zealand one, wouldn't you?
Or if they're the same price.
No, you'd be prepared to pay just $1 or a couple of dollars extra for the New Zealand one.
No, not necessarily. And the reason for that is if I buy a suit made in China, that basically the Chinese end up with some New Zealand dollars. They have to cash them in, and the only way they can cash them in is to buy stuff from New Zealand. That's how trade works. And so, in effect, the more that I buy from China, the more China has to buy from us. So you actually only export so you can import, and the more you can import, the more you'll export. It's actually that simple. But here's the problem in manufacturing in this country. Red tape is killing us, and it doesn't matter if it's national or Labour. It just thunders up, and you can hardly do a thing in this country. You can hardly move, and tax is killing us. And that's where we should be focusing our attention, not tinkering with, the exchange rate, tinkering with the Reserve Bank. We tried all that with Muldoon. This is actually a return to Muldoonism.
Selwyn, I know you want to jump in there and say something there, but we're going to have to go to the news update. We're back. It's 32 minutes past 8. We're back right after the news update. It is 8:37. We're with Selwyn Manning and Rodney Hyde, based in Wellington there. A couple of texts come through. How can Peter Dunn vote to increase the power of the GCSB when he is expressing such concern over the privacy of his email? Someone else says, Kia ora, Wallace, we send people to prison as punishment, not for punishment. If while incarcerated their rights are violated, why wouldn't a civilised society do the right thing? That's Susan. And someone says, Jude says, yes, many years ago, the divorces listed, the court cases, I think that's the truth. That's right, reading the divorces in truth. Text live to 3920 on the issues. We welcome your feedback at radiolive.co.nz. Sunday show page, email address is there as well. Well, new regulations are coming into force. It'll give the public more reasons to object to the granting of an alcohol licence. Objections must be for the greater good of the community and can be made if based on the broader business criteria license. Now, this is one of the issues of our times. Alcohol. It's about how we're consuming it, the way we're drinking it, a huge set of recommendations, and this one giving the community more say, particularly in places like South Auckland, Selwyn, Manning, where you're from. This is a big issue for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you and I both grew up there, Wallace.
We did.
Yes. Yeah, no, like I've said so many times in the past that, you walk down the streets in the urban retail areas of South Auckland towns and you shake your head.
Well, they're becoming suburbanised, aren't they? These nasty little liquor places.
Well, they just popped up. Like it's almost become an abhorrent kind of joke in a sense that in Manukau City, in Manurewa alone, you've got over 60 liquor licensing outlets. That's just so stocked up in the main street. It's just littered everywhere. Now, some would say, I suppose, that they wouldn't be there if there wasn't a demand for it. But what the challenge has been politically is to actually get legislation in where the local councillors and the local citizens can actually do something to actually curb the rise, to stop dairies becoming liquor outlets. And finally, it looks like there has been some improvement.
It's a bigger story really than all the synthetic cannabis stuff, isn't it? I mean, miles bigger. Rodney, what do you make of this one here? Better teeth for the community, I guess, isn't it?
Oh, well, it'll make them feel better, and we'll have we'll think we're solving the problem, but in my judgment, we won't be. And Selwyn put his, finger on it when he said, yes, I understand that, they're there because people want to buy the stuff and get drunk. And I think that's the issue. They'll always find a way to buy the stuff and get drunk. And we have, very, very tough laws against cannabis, but there are tinny houses right through South Auckland too.
Oh, they're all over the country. You can't just whack South Auckland on that one.
No, but the point of it is that, that's actually prohibited. And so we haven't actually succeeded in reducing tinny houses and cannabis use, and I don't think we can look to Parliament or local councils with controls to change alcohol use. The difficulty is, what is it about the New Zealand psyche, more than any other society that I'm familiar with, other than if you go to, where the Eskimos live, that we love young people and older people going out and drinking ourselves into a stupor and causing mayhem.
Which is a different issue to the liquor licensing thing. You can talk
culturally and philosophically, Rodney, but this is practical stuff, isn't it? Surely.
Oh, look, you'll feel great, Wallace, and look, I've passed this law and I've banned these shops. You won't have changed a thing in terms of people's behaviour outcomes.
From the point of view of the local communities, you've got, say, a dairy that's been servicing an area for maybe 20 years, then suddenly it becomes a liquor licensing outlet. You've got people that didn't even necessarily shop at the dairy suddenly are flogging to this place. We've seen incidences of murders take place around these joints, and that something needed to be done, and it needed a political solution.
Something needs to be done.
I agree, Rodney, that there are sociological approaches there that need to be talked, and they have been talked through, but there's been a lot of talk on this issue, and finally there's a law that is coming through that goes some way to correcting the problems of the past. The liquor licensing trusts that were set up before, they were open to cronyism, where if somebody wanted to actually open some grog shop on a corner next to a school, a primary school for example, that all they had to do was give a bung to one of the people on the licensing trusts, or give them free drinks or free grog for a month, and they would get their license. It was that kind of opportunity for corruption. At least now the communities have a say in saying, oh no, we put a line through this, we do not want this opening up.
What would you? I mean, how do you? Does Rodney have a point, Selwyn? I mean, there is obviously demand, there isn't there, and maybe that's a wider societal issue about why people are, gravitating towards getting on the piss.
I would love to get in. We could talk for an hour on this one, of all the reasons why these types of things develop in our communities. And a lot of people would say that it comes and it's born from desperation, but Rodney would say I'm being miserable, that and it makes him feel even happier when he hears me talk about these things. But it's the reality check of it. If you haven't got manufacturing jobs, or you haven't got jobs for people, they're not going to just sit at home. They're going to think of doing something with their time, and sometimes if they haven't got an outlet for anything, they'll go and get rotten. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, Rodney, you wouldn't want to live in your community and have one of these ugly, nasty liquor shops, down on the corner area where your children, go past and that type of thing, huh?
Oh no, I hate it. And I mean, I hate graffiti. I hate, the miserableness of some of our suburbs, people walking around, looking like complete losers and tossers. I hate it. But I don't actually pretend, and I don't want to divert a whole lot of attention into a piece of legislation and a rearrangement of the tinkering and think, oh yeah, that'll fix it, because it won't.
Up here in Auckland, for example, George Hawkins introduced this particular piece of legislation to Parliament in 2008. In some ways, it's absolute shame that the parties didn't pick it up themselves to look at putting it through its the ropes to get something that really did address. I know in Auckland and the local communities, the councillors now are saying, thank goodness there's something that we can work with.
All right, it's 9:15. We're with Rodney Hyde and Selwyn Manning. You can text us here, text live to 392 on that one. That is a big one, that one. Just briefly on Wellington Transport's infrastructure is about to take off, or was about to take off. I know Celia Wade-Brown wanted a rail link, and boom, $940 million later, couldn't afford it there. So, Rodney, what do you... I mean, you're down there. Do we need a rail link there? I know there's a lot of controversy now about this Basin Reserve flyover. Grant Roberts is calling a concrete monstrosity. Do we need that as well?
Well, just on the rail, I mean, it was interesting. Cecilia Wade-Brown campaigned on light rail, and when they did the study, I think it was 3 times more expensive. It was up to $1 billion compared to sort of using buses. And interestingly, Wellington's one of the few cities where train travel is economic, given that we've got that stretched out coast. So if you think light rail isn't a goer in Wellington, you can definitely rule out heavy rail in Auckland. It's just too expensive and inflexible compared to actual buses and public transport via the road. So I don't know why we always have this inbuilt bias running to trains rather than buses. Buses are far superior. On the flyover, look, I don't know. I have trouble visualising things when they're finished, and so I see them working there, and I'm trying to imagine, how would it look with a flyover? And I can't quite picture it.
It's funny, that's not a bad point Rodney has. There is this inbuilt thing we have for trains, isn't it? What is it, the romance of it, perhaps, Selwyn?
Maybe it's Murder on the Orient Express, and all this, the romance of it, and having a bit of a relaxing kind of ride that just tinkers along. But I think the economies relating to this issue in Auckland drive a lot of the public's want for this, and clearly the public does want rail, and that's relating to the link, in the sense of, instead of trains backing up the line and then sodding off on the various lines, it puts them into a link where they can go around. I mean, that in some ways makes economic sense. But this issue in Wellington, from a distance looking at it's quite different. From an Aucklander's point of view, it's not amusing, but what is fascinating is how Wellington can't actually work out a decision on these things relating to roading and transport. Auckland, I thought Auckland was the one that could never resolve these things. But remember, this debate on this flyover thing has been going on for ages, and then you've got Transmission Gully thing that seems to pop up every time Peter Dunn wants some votes, and it just goes on and on and on. Maybe, Rodney, that a super city in Wellington is on the cards, and it needs to be pushed harder so a decision can be made.
You're going to campaign for it over there, Rodney? A super city?
No.
Why was it good for Auckland and not for Wellington?
I think it would be tremendous if it was done in Wellington, but I'm not going to campaign for it.
It is 30 minutes away from 9 o'clock. Well, stay with us after the break. Actually, I want to have your Wellingtonians' perspectives on the Basin Reserve flyover. Actually, text live to 392. After the break, we talk electricity prices, getting locked into these long-term contracts. I was almost tempted to get on one of these. And we also talk about bank fees. Stay with us. 9 minutes away from 9 o'clock. Well, there is one truth in the world. Prices for electricity will always keep going up, and every now and then you get this letter in the mail saying, what you can do is you can be locked into a long-term contract and you can actually save some money, but apparently it's not quite so clear-cut. What do you think? This issue around electricity pricing and prices, Selwyn, it's just overly complex, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's the problem with it. Is for the consumer, for the person who's paying the power bills, you just don't know what's the best deal to do. You get some aggressive kind of sales pitch coming to you from one angle. You get someone knocking at your door saying, they represent the other company or one of the other companies, and they're coming from another angle. And at the end of the day, you don't know if you're Arthur or Martha. And the problem is there, I think, is that creates perhaps an argument for change. And I think that's where the population has become sympathetic in a positive sense to some of the political policies coming out of the Labour Greens bloc relating to power consumer pricing and simplifying perhaps that structure, because it's a mess. It's a complex mess.
It's got to be one of the political issues, and of course, and then the line charges, we're not, they keep going up, and other parts of the package go down. Rodney, what do you think of this? I mean, are you locked into a long-term contract yourself, or how do you do?
No, but I recently had a young gentleman knock on my door and persuade me to swap. And you're going to ask me what I swapped from too, and I can't bloody remember.
See, that may be one of the problems.
Oh, yeah, no, stupid people like me. But I went through all the calculations and myself, and it worked out a good deal. And so we did it, but it wasn't a long-term contract. We can still swap, and of course New Zealanders are swapping big time. I think it's 28% a year, and that costs actually the retailers a huge amount of money, and so if they can lock you in, they can save money and perhaps offer a better deal. But the price of power is going up in New Zealand because it's impossible to actually build a new generating capacity. We've basically prohibited every new generating capacity imaginable. In the US, of course, the price of natural gas is just falling dramatically, and it's cheaper now than ever.
One of the interesting things too is, the New Zealand public may not have ever really been aware of it, but there was always calculations coming out of various government departments and ministries on solving some of these generation costs. And nuclear generation was often in those documents, government documents.
That's right.
Even very recently. Yeah. Whereas, if those arguments start coming into the frame on the back of the high cost of power generation in New Zealand, perhaps we need to look at the United States, like in California, for example. They're going the other way. After Japan's problems relating to nuclear generation at Fukushima, the Americans are switching on to this thing of let's get out of being reliant on
What were the problems at Fukushima, Selwyn?
I'm not going to go into the details of those problems. I'm talking about where the Americans are coming from on that, where they're saying that the problems relating to a natural emergency that impacted on Fukushima and caused problems in a major kind of circle around it for the people living there and et cetera, that those things were dangers that they did not necessarily want to face on their own turf. And so there's been this move politically to examine pulling out. Those who would be reading outlets like the Huffington Post, etc., would be right up with that debate where the Americans are switching off from nuclear generation. What
are you saying here, Rodney? Are you suggesting that nuclear power in the future could be part of our mix?
No, I don't think it's necessary in New Zealand. But I do get annoyed because everyone got so up in arms about Fukushima, and you ask them, well, what was actually the problem with it? What was the damage?
Well, I think nuclear fallout and waste is
there was none.
One of the problems.
There was none.
Well, there'd be 1,000 scientists that would take you to task on that one.
Well, show me the Japanese person that was sick.
You're starting to sound like John Key when he was on Hard Talk on the BBC, where he's saying, New Zealand is 100% pure. It's talking with semantics when you take a particular line and then you ask the other person to justify your own position. Well, I'm sorry, the public opinion is suggesting that Fukushima was a nightmare.
I've got no doubt, Selwyn, that you're absolutely right about public opinion. I've got no doubt at all that California and Germany and other countries have actually, backpedaled. Their price of power will go through the roof. Here in New Zealand, we don't need nuclear power. We've got plenty of natural resources that we could be developing: coal, water, geothermal. It's impossible to get a resource consent to develop it because of the greenies.
And at the end of the day, if all of these things are sorted out, both at political level and in operational level, then the public might get a decent power bill instead of it being ratcheted up by people who are exploiting it.
We've got 4 minutes to go, so I want to move on briefly. I actually want to touch on just the most trusted poll, because I've been scouring the most trusted people of 2013. Neither of you are on there. I'm looking here. We've got. I'm not.
I think John Banks is on there, isn't he?
John Banks is at 99. Yeah. Hone Harawira is at 100. Rodney, where were you this time around?
I was so pleased I wasn't on it because I was always at the bottom. And I figure it's better, if you're going to be at the bottom, it's better not to be there, isn't it?
So considering it's a factor of 100 people, it sounds like John Banks beat you by one, Rodney.
Possibly. I might be 1,001 now.
Well, to the people of New Zealand, I mean, give us an inkling. What's it like being on a most trusted poll, Rodney? Is it one of you haven't been near the top, but you've still been on it? Is it one of is it a nice feeling or
no?
Right.
No, and I'll tell you why.
Why?
I tell you why, because, well, trust actually is important. We all like to be trusted, and we all like to think that, our word is our bond, and it means a lot to us, and we value our integrity. And the idea that public perception sort of shapes that, and then you get this supposedly objective measure of it, a Reader's Digest poll of, what you think of people, it's quite upsetting. Because I think, like everyone, and especially politicians, I put a lot of value on what I say and giving my word and having integrity. There's a lot of disagreements and a lot of arguments because, that's the nature of life. But this idea that your word can't be trusted, I find very upsetting.
Which is a good point, isn't it? And that's that whole idea of who can you trust?
Yeah,
it's a political thing, isn't it?
Well, it is, and it's an interesting thing too when you compare industries or professions. I think politicians, journalists, and car salesmen usually in this country come down really low. But yeah, I mean, we all, especially when you're talking about issues like this, you actually have to come from a credible, position, don't you? And irrespective of whether or not someone agrees with you, there's got to be a sense of trusting that they understand where you come from.
That is very interesting. It's been a fantastic hour with you guys. Rodney Hyde, thank you very much, and thank you for the heads up about the Shackleton book. That title again?
Endurance.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Very good.
Great
indeed.
book. Published first in 1959, would you believe? But he got to talk to the survivors and went through all their diaries. I mean, they all survived the actual trip, but the survivors that were still alive in the 50s.